Hello and welcome to the Point Blank Show. My name is Abhishek, and today we have with us Jean Martin Bauer, who has served with the World Food Programme for many decades. He's responded to food emergencies in Afghanistan, Sahel, the Central African Republic, Syria, Niger, Senegal, Liberia, and many other war torn countries. He's particularly fond of data, loves numbers, and has brought about various digital technologies and analytics to fight hunger. His most recent book, The New Breadline Hunger and Hope in the 21st Century, is a fascinating account of poverty around the world and what we can do to address it. Thank you so much, JM, as you would like yourself to be called. Thank you for joining in, JM.
Thanks, Abhishek. Nice to be here.
Thanks. When you made that career choice back in 2001, was it when right out of college you decided to join the World Food Programme? How did your friends and family react to it, and what was that decision based on?
Well, I think some people were puzzled. Others thought it was very much in character. I was known as an adventurous person, as a curious and outgoing guy, so it matched. I was in university in the US, and most of my colleagues were going to work for the government or the private sector, uh, not overseas, not in a very poor country in West Africa, because I started my career in Niger, which at the time was desperately poor, still today faces many challenges. So there was curiosity, and I have to say, for those who knew me, knew that that was the path I chose for very different reasons. But the first one was the fact I have family history in the area of food security. My uncle Serge was a rice farmer in Haiti. So I grew up in the US, but my family on my mother's side came from Haiti. They left Haiti in the 1960s during a dictatorship. The country was going through, a, I would say, dark decades under the rule of two dictators, François Duvalier and his son Jean-Claude. They were in power from 1956 to 1986. So it's a 30-year rule of this family. Ruled Haiti with an iron fist. And my family in the 1950s was supporting this regime. But like dictatorships all do, the dictator got paranoid and expelled my family about 10 years into his tenure. And what's interesting is that one of my family members, my uncle Serge, decided to revolt against the dictator, and he tried to mount an expedition to sail to Haiti with his friends, uh, get out of the boat with their weapons, and march into Haiti and do a revolution, just like Fidel Castro had done in Cuba just a few years before. But it didn't work out, and my uncle knew that he was in New York preparing this thing. They would meet at his apartment, but he knew that it wasn't going to work out. There were spies. It got too big. There was too much noise being made, and my uncle decided to stay behind. And his friends went to Haiti in that boat, and they were all killed, one by one. And the last two were shot in public in front of the television crews who were filming their execution. And my uncle felt guilty for the rest of his life, but once the elder Duvalier died, when his son came into power, he felt it was safe enough for him to go back to Haiti, and he started growing rice. He went back home and became a farmer, and it was really the job of his life. So it was a revolutionary, and then became a farmer. And there's a link between both. When you grow food, when you feed your community, you're doing something very important. You're perhaps doing something revolutionary in some cases, and that's what he was trying to do in southern Haiti. And I visited him as a child. I went to see Serge a few times, and what he was trying to do in southern Haiti to me really inspired me. It was magical. I saw that as a teenager. That's what I wanted to do with my life. Um,
Right.
Unfortunately, Serge ran into some hard times. He had difficulties growing his rice in southern Haiti. Every year, the fertilizer got more expensive, the seeds got more expensive, the diesel was more expensive. He'd have to take out loans. The machines he bought, he was always running behind, never
Mhm.
really able to deliver on the promises of the Green Revolution. He was on his farm, never really getting the rewards of his efforts, and ultimately Haiti opened its borders to international imports of rice. In the 1990s, we all remember that there was a big movement to open up markets to trade, and he lost his market overnight in 1994 when the tariff on imported rice fell from over 30% to almost nothing in Haiti. And he had to go all over uh, back to the drawing board to try to get his farm going again. So, I mean, this story really inspired me, and it brought me to work for the World Food Program to try to create and a better world, to try to help small farmers
Hmm.
get a better deal and build food security in their own communities. So that's my story. That's what brought me here.
Right. No, I mean, some of those who must have known you from childhood would have said, like uncle, like nephew, then, in terms
Absolutely.
of what you wanted to go and change. And was there a gap between your perception of getting into this field and the reality? You write that your first experience was that of purchasing food at local markets, negotiating logistics with trucking companies. Now these are things that they may not teach you in books. You have to be on the field to be able to do
Well,
this. So how was that experience overall?
look, Abhishek, my job has been eye-opening, absolutely eye-opening, and I think I started very naive about the world we live in, but I learned a lot. And as you said, these very down-to-earth things happen to be quite complicated, and but they're fascinating. I remember working in a country which had a trucking monopoly. There was one trucking company in the entire country. And I remember taking economics courses, and they taught us about monopolies and how they work. And it sort of made sense to me. This is what these guys are trying to do. And this is well, of course, there was no regulatory agency, or the regulation didn't work because it was one company trying to
Hmm.
extract as much money as possible from its users. So I felt it was fascinating, and to be honest, Abhishek, in the book I wrote, The New Breadline, it's about how these things don't work, and how these markets fail the poor, and how trucking companies or food suppliers, even when everything is in place, well, it's not enough to actually feed the poorest of the poor. And I found it so interesting that I felt I'd write a book about it.
And jumping directly into the central theme of the book itself, now it talks about hunger. And I learned a few things about this topic, which is,
Hmm.
which one of the things was what hunger does to the human body, because I've never been in a situation where I've had to starve for food for beyond a few hours, given that we have a roof over our head because of the parents and education. Could you just explain what does hunger do to the human body, which you describe in some detail in your book?
Well, in the book, I describe something I read in a book by Marguerite Duras called The War. And this is a French writer, a very famous French writer, who describes her husband returning from after World War II, coming back home in France from the concentration camps. And she describes how her husband was so weak that he couldn't even eat food because the food would lacerate his stomach. Anything he would eat, he would throw up. But so he was too weak to eat the food, and he couldn't continue living without eating, but he couldn't eat without killing himself. And that's when you get to the extremes. I mean, your body rejects the food it actually needs to survive. But those are thankfully extreme cases. Unfortunately, these things continue in some parts of the world. We have these situations of famine. This is the most extreme case. I mean, it happened in Somalia a few years ago. It happened in South Sudan. We had a famine right now in parts of Sudan. It's always when war's involved, and what it does to your body is that you lose all your weight. Your body tries to protect the organs. It shuts everything down just to protect, the heart, the liver, the kidneys. And when there's just not enough left, your body can't digest anything for lack of minerals. And unfortunately, people who die of starvation usually die of cardiac arrest. And it's gruesome. It's painful, and it's something we wish on nobody. And the most painful thing is seeing it in children. And many
Right.
of the people who are the most vulnerable to starvation happen to be. There are also powerful psychological impacts. I mean, I know, Abhishek, you asked me about the physical impacts of hunger, but there are also psychological impacts. So imagine you're from a not a desperately poor family, but a family that struggles to make ends meet from time to time. That's still really stressful. So I write about how in the United States, researchers have proven that families that aren't quite sure about where their next meal will come from, or who have to switch from the foods that they like to another, or skip meals, that has a very bad influence on you. It creates something that doctors call toxic stress. It's a rise in the stress hormones in your body, and there's a stress response activated in your body over the long term, and that's bad for the development of children, and it's bad for your mental health. It's also linked to things like diabetes, and that's probably an unknown, a little known fact, and it's again what makes hunger so dangerous. It can kill you if you don't eat enough, but if you're stressed about the food, about eating properly, or being able to feed your children, that will also undermine you for life.
And the numbers too are staggering, aren't they? I think I read on the World Bank's website earlier today that they estimated that in 2022, 712 million people globally were living in extreme poverty, which is 23 million more as compared to 2019. If you earn below that figure of a little more than $2, you are considered to be in that group.
That's right.
And so that's a huge number.
It is, and if you look at hunger, which is one of the key dimensions of poverty, it's actually a bit of a slippery topic to navigate. People unable to afford a healthy diet, that's 2.8 billion people in the world. It's a lot of people. 2.8 billion not able to afford a healthy diet. If you look at the opposite extreme, so we just talked about starvation,
Hmm.
uh, acute food insecurity, that's about 300 million people. And then you've got numbers in between. There's a number that the UN reports on every year, and that number's been around 700 million for some time now. But what I try to explain also is that the trends have been discouraging. Is that when I started my career in 2001 in the UN, there was a lot of optimism. There was a sense that hunger could be beat within my career, and people said, "Hey, you're starting a career, but we're going to reach zero hunger by 2030, and therefore we'd be out of a job. We'd be made redundant because we've succeeded in defeating hunger, if you take it to its logical conclusion." But there was really a sense of positivity, possibility in the fight against hunger. There was the example of Brazil, which made very significant inroads against hunger in the 2000s because of larger social expenditures, and very complex and well-designed programs, very inclusive programs to fight hunger. So the thinking was, well, we're going to do this all over the world, and we're going to get to zero hunger. Well, unfortunately, Abhishek, we're very far from zero hunger. The last time there was a report by the UN on hunger, it's about 700 million people. Acute hunger, we're at 300 million people. And the problem is these numbers were dropping until about 2014, 15, and then they stagnated. And
Hmm.
we're facing right now the stubborn tail end of hunger. The easy gains are behind us. And now what we
Hmm.
have, if we want to get to zero hunger, if we really want to get rid of hunger in our world, is going to cost a lot more. It's going to be a lot more effort. It's a lot more difficult than what's been behind us. But if you look at things really long term, in the past century, we've done a lot. I mean, we've really um, I mean, we should be satisfied with how large scale famines no longer exist in the world. We've all heard horrible stories from our grandparents about what it was like during the World Wars, for example, where millions of people died of hunger. We don't have that anymore. The systems are in place to bring help to people who'd suffered from them. But now we're at again this tail end of hunger, the most difficult part of hunger, because people are in remote areas, the problems are intractable, and it just requires much more coordination to be able to beat hunger in our day.
To your point of things being really bad back in the day, I think you write about 1973 in a drought in Sahil, was it, where people had
Yes,
to eat what animals ate, which is bark and grass, and people would talk about it as a matter of fact.
that's right. And
So
that
yeah.
was a period of prolonged drought. It's according to meteorologists, the Sahel drought of the 1970s was one of the longest ever observed on Earth. And I spent about 11 years in the Sahel, so I got to know the that part of the world, and people would talk about that drought, even 40 years later in hushed tones, because they were still dealing with the aftermath. The people I was working with had experienced the drought as children, and it was really seared into
Mm.
their memories. And I remember working with an official in Mauritania who told me that so his family were cattle herders. Like me, he had an uncle, and his uncle was raised cattle. And he says that he took the cattle and marched them south. The rain comes from the south, so he marched them south for weeks, crossed into the neighboring country, and even in the neighboring country where there always is water, there was no water because the drought was so bad. So they turned around to try to bring the cows home, and he says that they left with hundreds of cows and they came back with maybe a dozen. It was he says it was a death march. The cows were dropping. He says if a cow would sit down, that was it. They wouldn't be able to get it back up again. So they were propping up the cows. They were trying to just make sure that they would take a few more steps. But they saw so many cows die that his uncle lost his mind. And in the Sahel, your wealth is in your animals. Your wealth is your livestock, and he got it completely wiped out in this drought, which lasted a few years and which was exceptionally severe. And it ushered in quite a few changes for the Sahel. It's an area that was perhaps quite poor, but that was fairly self-sufficient in terms of food. My colleagues described growing up in an ocean of milk because there was so much milk to drink from the cows when they were young, and
Wow.
and that's disappeared right now. It's a very different life. People had to move to the cities after this drought, and it completely changed the nature of society. So it's remembered as an event that was really a turning point in food security in that part of the world.
Your book is it doesn't just it's not a number fest, although you like numbers is what you said. There are barely it's got human stories in there,
Yeah,
and one of them was again heartbreaking, where you talked about Mauritania. I think there was a mom that you described in
yeah.
out there who pretends to cook at night, only to kid her children into believing that food is coming when it's just a charade, and she keeps it up until they are asleep, which is it's just one paragraph. It just makes you, it gives hunger a human element, which just is very hard to grasp. How do you deal with these things, and how did you do that when you were in your 20s? How you get to write these stories and experience them.
Mhm.
How do you deal with them, Jem?
Well, Abhishek, I have to say I admire these people. I admire the people I meet. And the woman who told me the story, she was right there at her home, which was a tent by a riverbed, and she was there with her children. And we were trying to. We knew it was a food crisis. It was a year of a food crisis, and I was sent to evaluate the impact of this crisis on people. And she just told this story with, I don't want to say she was happy about it, but she had such strength. And she says, "This is how we live right now." And I could tell she had energy, that she was determined to do whatever she could to feed her children, like any of us, by the way. Abhishek, I didn't ask about, I mean, I'm sure you have children, or
Yeah, I do one.
you
Yes.
do. Yeah. And I mean, we'd all do anything to feed our children, and I think what I saw in this woman, and others like her that I describe in the book, is just so much spirit and love, and determination that I find it admirable. But sometimes it is difficult, because I'm a foreigner. I'm not really part of that society. I don't understand everything that's going on. So you have to also remember that things are going on that you can't fully understand. And I also describe in the book how I met a young boy in Syria who was diving in a dumpster to find food for his mother. And I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, I had some money
Mm.
on me, but my Syrian colleagues were like, no, 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 no. Don't. I mean, it would have been the easy thing for me to do as a foreigner there with a little bit of money in my pocket, was to slip him a banknote and send him on his way so he didn't have to be in the dumpster that day. But it wouldn't have resolved anything for him or his family, and it might even
Mm.
have put them in danger in those situations. So So I suppose part of the reason I wrote this book, Abhishek, is also to share the stories and make sure that hunger today is understood. I mean, I feel quite often that these problems are misunderstood in the West. I mean, India has a specific history, and I've unfortunately never been to India, but I've read a lot of books by Indian authors and read a lot about your country. But where I'm from, I think hunger is considered something that's way in the past, will never come back. Uh, it's something that people are uncomfortable with because it's just an inconvenient truth that you've got
Mm.
a world where you've got as many resources as we have right now, that you have so many people dying of hunger, and people affected by hunger. So I think that it's really time for people to read stories like these, hopefully, and realize that there's a problem there, but there are also solutions. It's not a fatality. There's a lot that can be done to address hunger. But the personal stories I share in the book are of the people who struck me. And again, meeting them kept me going. It showed me how important the work I do is, and I try to relay that and share that in the book.
And among the hope or solutions that one may have to address hunger, I think you quote Amartya Sen, who won the Nobel for his
Yes.
work in economics, and he writes, and I quote him: "No famine has ever taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy." And he wrote that back in 1991. That's quite a telling statement, then, right? Because dictators, obviously, it is in their interest to hoard food grains, and the countrymen will tolerate any atrocities as long as they are fed. And I think Syria comes to mind, where the dictatorship there has propped up the economy by, or rather, just about enough to, feed its own. So, democracy and hunger, is there a proper economic connection to it? That if you are a democracy, the odds are that people will not go hungry.
Well, we're talking about extreme hunger here. And I think India is a
Okay.
great example.
Yeah.
India suffered extreme famines in the 19th century during the colonial period as a result of drought, but also of colonial policies. There's a great book written by Mike Davis, the late Mike Davis, who taught at the University of California, about the effect of drought on India, but also of all these colonial policies that led the British not to spend on relief in India, and in fact to continue exporting grain from India to the UK in the midst of the Great Drought in the 19th century. And I think what Amartya Sen says about democracy and hunger, it's really about acute hunger. And
Ah,
democracies are actually quite good at preventing a famine from taking shape, because it's what he calls famine an entitlement failure. So every citizen in a democracy is entitled to food through the markets, through your own work, but somehow at the end of the day, everyone needs to be fed. And when that breaks down, it's so dangerous to society that a democracy will find a way to direct resources to the people who are in danger. And democracies have shown that they're good at doing that. But as you say, autocracies have also shown that they're good
mm,
at keeping their people fed. So I'm in Rome in Italy right now, and the Romans who created this city almost 3,000 years ago, from the early days of the Republic, they would provide a measure of grain to every citizen for free. You're a Roman citizen, you're entitled to a ration of grain. That was to keep Rome quiet. It was to buy peace. Rome was built on two things, peace in Rome, on two things, bread and circuses, bread and games. And the citizenry had this ration of bread every day. And they had quite a few days during the year where they would go to the Colosseum and watch the gladiators, or uh, fighting wild animals, or fighting each other, or races or chariot races. And that was social peace. It's a foundation of social peace, and a regime that will try to survive will find a way of providing bread to its
mm,
population. In the case of Rome, there was a very complex system to get grain from all the way across the Mediterranean here to Rome, and this was thousands of years ago with wooden boats in very difficult conditions, but they managed because it was the price of survival for the Roman state. And we need to know that today, and it wasn't a democracy, of course. So these very oppressive regimes find a way to keep the population placated,
right.
um, But the famine, definitely democracy has been a way for countries to get out of that. But even in democracies, you will see other forms of hunger. You will see chronic hunger. So that's hunger that doesn't kill, but hunger that stunts, that
Mm.
holds you back. And that we see in many countries, many democracies. We see that in the U.S., where you've got 13 million households without enough to eat, and that's a problem.
And you also say that there is enough food to feed every individual in the world,
Yes.
but the irony is that we still have all of this.
There's plenty of food to feed everyone. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard this. People listening, you've all heard this, but it's true. There is enough food for everyone on this earth, but it's not distributed equally. You've got some parts of the planet that have too much food, other parts of the planet that don't have enough. But quite often at the national level, you'll find that there's enough food, but then you find pockets of poverty. You find populations that whose right to food hasn't been recognized or is denied in different ways, directly or indirectly.
Mm.
And that's a large part of what determines hunger today. So just to go back to the Sahel a little bit, Abhishek, you've got um, very old arrangements between masters and slaves, traditional slaves in West Africa. That still exists, unfortunately, and obviously those who are the I would say not the traditional masters, but the caste of former slaves. They bear the brunt of hunger in our day because of these unequal arrangements within society. So they tend to be very poor, and when a population is very poor, any incident like a drought, a flood, a rise in food prices that will cause hunger in that group first. So hunger is the result of these deep-rooted inequalities that need to be counteracted, and maybe that's why ending hunger is so difficult. It's of course there's a lot of it that's linked with war, with climate change, but it's also linked to these deep-rooted fundamental conditions like poverty, like discrimination, like belonging to a caste of a lower order, and that's a lot. That's very difficult to deal with. It's a long-term thing.
You briefly mentioned war there, where there have been enough instances where these rulers have chosen to starve people
Yes.
as one of their ways to, have control over them. And I
Hmm.
found this mind-boggling that it was only in 2018 that I read in your book did the UN Security Council pass a resolution to condemn starving as a form of warfare, which wasn't covered in the Hague Convention, is what you write in 1899 or 1907. Uh,
Right,
is
right.
that that's baffling to somebody who's
It,
a layman who reads this?
it is, and to be very specific, Abhishek, what happened in recently, just a few years ago in 2018, was that the Security Council closed a loophole to ensure that the International Court of Justice has jurisdiction over non-international conflicts. It had jurisdiction over international, but non-international, so internal conflicts that was not part of their jurisdiction. And that meant that if war crimes were being committed, they couldn't prosecute. And that means that now, with this new jurisprudence, the International Court of Justice can prosecute perpetrators for the commission of crimes of war, including starving civilians during war, and that's progress. But if you look at the history of things, it's changed, but very, very slowly. In I explain how in the World War II there was a terrible siege in the Soviet Union. The German army laid siege to Leningrad. It's a siege that took a very long time. It was over years, and it's a horrific siege. Horrific siege. I think the death toll in that siege is about 1 million people. It's really one of the darkest hours of World War II. And the Germans encircled the city, and the commanders purposefully denied food to the civilian populations to gain military advantage. And after World War II, the a military tribunal, a U.S. military tribunal, brought the commander to court, and they exonerated him for starvation in Leningrad. And the rationale was that commanders are allowed to do that, even if it's ugly. So the
Hmm.
judges said this is an ugly way of waging war, but there's precedent, and they did not want to condemn this person. He was convicted on other counts, but not for starvation and war. And that shows that for such a long time, hunger was tolerated within as a legitimate form of warfare. And I explained how in the U.S. Civil War it was very important. It's probably how one of the reasons the North won its war against the South. It was because the North managed to destroy the grain fields of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. So it changed very, very slowly, Abhishek. And I think what we saw was a progressive change of mentality over generations after World War II. So of course people suffered these. I would say they lived through those dark days in World War II. There was a war in Nigeria in the 1970s, the Biafra War, and that's when starving children were on TV screens in the West for the first time, and people started asking what's wrong with this picture, and we shouldn't be tolerating this, and so there was a modification to the Geneva Protocols at that point, but we only got to actually a point where we can convict and we'll try and hopefully convict the perpetrators in 2018 after action by the United Nations. So it's and we haven't yet in the years since the jurisprudence was changed, we haven't yet been able to have a trial yet, a prosecution. It's very expensive, it's very slow, and there's no guarantee that someone who's brought to trial would actually um, I would say have a well, what's the burden of evidence? There are just a lot of questions right now, so we're
Mm.
not there yet. So I think you've heard me say the word incremental at least twice, but it's really been baby steps, but we're
Right.
headed thankfully in the right direction.
And another thing that we take for granted as readers, let's say, is that let's say there is hunger, people are starving, there is a humanitarian aid worker and his team wanting to help them. They will find these humanitarian folks to be God sent and everything will be great. They'll get along well. But you write that that isn't the case. There is a lot of skepticism on the ground, and you are not always welcome for a million other reasons, which is down to culture or perception or anything else for that matter. Can you describe that with a
Well,
couple of examples?
Abhishek, I'll tell you, there's also outright hostility.
Wow.
That's something I've seen with the population in these countries. And we need to have empathy for the
Hmm.
population that's in a crisis and that's suffering from a lack of food and lack of many other things because it's never only food. I can tell you that I when I worked in Haiti, I unfortunately had two offices of the organization I work for attacked. And the food was stolen, and one of the offices was attacked, looted, and burned to the ground by the population. And I remember discussing this with colleagues. I mean, to me, it was really a low point in my career, and it really felt like a gut punch when that happens to you. You're an aid worker, you're trying to bring help, and your offices and your staff get attacked. It's really thankfully no one got hurt. But and I think that was thankfully no one got hurt, but still it was a gut punch. And when you think about why that happens, and I remember talking to colleagues, I was told that we're not heroes anymore. Maybe there was a time a few decades ago where humanitarian aid workers were considered neutral, independent, people who were there to help change things for the better. But that's not how the world works anymore. We're viewed with suspicion. We're seen as people with agendas. We're seen as everything but a neutral, helpful presence. And that makes us vulnerable to attacks. And unfortunately, we've seen attacks on humanitarians rise. What happened uh, to the team in those offices that got looted has happened, unfortunately, in many other countries of the world.
And how do you then, deal with this? How do you, for example, motivate your team when such a thing happens? Because you will have somebody who's in their early 20s wanting to start, and then it's easy for them to get disillusioned.
Well, that's true, and I have to say after this one of these attacks, I went to the place that got attacked. I took the helicopter to go there, and we couldn't go to the office because it had been burned down. So I met the team. It was about 20 people
Hmm.
in another location. We rented a room somewhere, and we met there. And I was expecting to see everyone distraught, panicking, perhaps. Like I said, I mean, I felt a gut punch, and I didn't really know what I would tell them. But I arrived in this place, and the team was there, and they told me, Jean-Martin, we want to get back to work. That was the clear message from everyone there. And
Right.
I think it took me by surprise. I thought they wanted to, some they wanted to talk about what happened. They wanted to, but no, they wanted to. First of all, they wanted to make sure that they would get back to work as soon as possible. And then, once that was clear, the rest could continue. And of course, we got the team back to work. And I was again impressed by this team's resilience, by their commitment to the cause. And we weren't going to abandon the thousands of people who relied on us for help. And what we did was get our programs going again. And to me, that's a great example of what you see in the humanitarian space. A lot of the work we do, it's about being able to take a punch,
Right.
to take your licks, and to keep on working without holding a grudge, and moving on and keeping on in spite of whatever life throws at you. You play the ball where it is. You accept that it's not going to be easy, and I think that gives you tremendous strength. And I have seen that in teams time and again.
And how do you plan for emergencies when suddenly you get news that two of your colleagues have been threatened, that they would be raped if a militia is not given their fair share of rice? And you have a small anecdote about how you stood up to them and you negotiate with them. How does that work? Life can throw whatever. I think I'll use a baseball example, curveballs, or in cricket, it's bouncers.
That's right. Well, you get the bouncer, and sometimes you realize that that's what I have, and I have to deal with it right now. And in the case of the incident you describe, I had to make sure that the team knew that the rest of us were supporting them. So what I did was I told them to get out of the area. So to have some context, this was an area that was affected by an insurgency, and there was a militia around, and they'd been quite violent during the conflict, but there had been a ceasefire, and this was after a ceasefire, and we were trying to bring aid to the area. And we understood that it wasn't the entire militia. It was probably just one or two rogue elements of the militia who'd been making these threats, but still, we couldn't tolerate threats to our team. So what I did was essentially go out, got in the car, drove to that part of the country, and I sat down and talked it over with the militia. And it took a while. We sat down with an arbiter. Essentially, it was a negotiation with a neutral party, and I had to tell them we can't do this. We can't work like this. You can't threaten us if we're bringing aid here. And we had to be very clear on the red lines. I think it worked for a time. The militia listened. Of course, they had their point of view, and but you have to be very firm. But first of all, for your team, for your colleagues, they need to know that you have their backs all the time, 100%. And after things had been cleared up, the team went back, and we resumed work. And we'd found a modus vivendi that way. But it does mean that doing the work I do, it means facing a lot of risk, but you never do it with you're never foolish about it. That means there are assessments that happen all the time, and if there's an incident, your first priority is always your staff's well-being, your staff's welfare, your staff's safety, your staff's security, and you don't compromise on that. And I think as long as people know that they can count on me, or that they can rely on their manager or supervisor, there's a lot we can do to help people in these desperate areas.
And talking about risk, JM, how was it to work in Afghanistan after the Taliban took over? What was the situation there when you scouted that place for offering
Well,
help?
I have to say, for me, it was I've worked in a lot of different environments, and going to Kabul in 2021 was it was different. It felt different to me. because the I'd been to Afghanistan once before briefly in 2016, but in 2021 things had changed dramatically in the country, of course, with the Taliban coming in. In my case, I remember being very nervous before going in, and it was one of the few planes coming into Kabul in September 21. There was just not much traffic, and so I was on this plane with one other person, and at the airport there were hundreds of people trying to leave the country, and so it just felt very strange. And then I get to Kabul and I see that um, something's not right. And at that time, people were selling their belongings. They were selling their furniture, their rugs, their household items to buy food because the situation had gotten so bad so quickly. And I think what I really again impressed me was the Afghan colleagues. Their country was in dire straits, but they would still show up at the office. They'd come to the WFP office every day. They would put in their hours. They would do the work, and at 5 o'clock in the evening, they would get up and go home and back to neighborhoods and families that were in dire need. But they still came up. They still showed up at the office every day to try to help their country and help us put together the plan to help Afghanistan. And that's something I really admired. So it was one of those times where there was a transition. It wasn't normal times. You're in between something and something else. But again, the mission to help people find food, to help people feed themselves at a time of distress. It's people will show up and they will do the work, and we will find a way of helping everyone. And I think that might be specific to humanitarian work. Maybe it's not all professions where it's that way, but I've always admired the dedication of my colleagues.
Amazing. And on the other hand, you have people who, I mean, the powers that be have naively sold off or leased, is what I read, that a corporation called Deu
Yeah.
suddenly gets its hand over a 99-year-old lease on a land in Madagascar so that they
Yeah.
can supply food in South Korea. How does that work? What's that about?
Well, that's something that people call land grabbing, and we might have. I'm thinking. I mean, you, me, Abhishek. We've seen that in the newspapers. The listeners might have seen that in the newspapers as well. It's about moneyed interests seizing control of a large area of land to grow crops, and usually cash crops.
Hmm.
And The problem with these transactions is that it takes away land from small farmers. It's that there's never a piece of land with no one on it. So in the case of Daewoo in Madagascar, the company signed a deal with the government, signing away and they signed away the rights to use an area of Madagascar that was as big as the country of Belgium. So it's about almost 30,000 square kilometers. Madagascar's big, but still it's a sizable chunk of land. And I mean there are a lot of problems with that. There were rumors about the corruption, and in fact the president of Madagascar. Who announced the deal wasn't in power shortly after. I think it really created an upswell in the country. But at the same time, we know that more food needs to be grown in places like Madagascar and other countries that experience hunger. And the governments don't have the money to make the investments. So it's clear that what needs to happen for foreign investors to come in with the cash to build the irrigation systems and flatten the land and improve the land. It's a bit of a catch-22. So if you try to do that, you might get accused, as the president of Madagascar was at the time, of corruption, of signing away the nation's land. So you get caught between that and you might also face food insecurity if you do nothing. So it's a bit, again, a bit of a catch-22. I described the situation in Mali where there was a very big uh, there's a big irrigated program in Mali. It's in an area called the Office du Niger. It's about 100,000 square kilometers. It's really a big area. excuse me, 100,000 hectares, not square kilometers. Oof. But the idea is that the country was just never able to build the canals to irrigate this land, and the Libyans came in and offered to do it in exchange for a
Mhm.
long-term lease to the rights of the land and water rights as well. The problem is always the local farmers. The deals are done over their heads.
Right.
They lose access to land that their fathers and their father's father were farming, and becomes a political hot potato. And I remember
Mm.
meeting elders in Mali who told me in 2009, we don't like this deal and we will go to the capital city with our axes. There is no surer way of starting an insurgency than taking away land from people. This is again one of the fundamental issues. So we talked about earlier in the interview, Abhishek, about the inequalities and the poverty that drive hunger. Land is another core issue. And the problem we see is that we need these investments, but they need to be made in a way that doesn't displace people, that doesn't dispossess people, because the political consequences are massive. And in the case of Mali, there was a coup
Mm.
just a few years after this deal was announced. People do very much resent being pushed off their lands. And in the book, I try to give an example of how this could be done differently. And it's not the case that all of these deals are 100% bad. I have seen companies try to find an agreement with the local population, and for example, bringing electricity or infrastructure to the places where they come in. Uh, but it is essential to find a way of having a win-win for sure, to increase food production, but also increase the standard of living for the people who are there and who've been there and whose sacred sites are on the land that's going to be turned into a farm, and who might be starving, by the way, who might be experiencing food insecurity too.
Right. And on the other side, since the time that you joined in 2001, when you started your career to
Yes.
now, in terms of technology, we leave politics aside. There will be stupid folks who would want to do things for their interest and they would let people starve. But from the solutioning standpoint, how much has technology changed and has made life easier or probably more effective? You talk about data and analytics as well. So in terms
Yeah.
of data modeling, can you predict certain things better today than before? Can you give a couple
Absolutely.
of examples
Absolutely.
that I can understand maybe?
I think if technology, it's really changed the way the work is done. Food security programs have completely changed thanks to data analytics, but also things like electronic transfers and digital payments. All that has changed the way we do things. And I'll start with analytics. For instance, today, well, let me start about the old days when I started. And I remember looking at I was for food security analysis when I started. I was told to look at two things. This is an old timer. He told me, Jean Martin, you need to look at two things in this business. It's rainfall and food prices. So if you're able to have good data on rainfall and good data on food prices, you're all set, and you know what to analyze, and you have all the data you need. But the data would come. It would take weeks to get from the remote parts of the country to the capital city, and then someone had to sit down and enter it into a spreadsheet, and then you might get a paper bulletin circulated around. It's really no way to do analysis. And what we have now is I can just open my browser and download the satellite imagery from yesterday with a 1 meter resolution on vegetation. So I know whether there's going to be a good crop or not in that part of the country because there's a satellite up there looking down at the earth. The image is refreshed almost every day, and that means we have almost real-time information about food security. We also, during the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2014, the team I worked on, well, we started mobile phone surveys in West Africa. Everyone has a phone in West Africa, but they did in 2014, and we started sending out surveys by SMS, and people responded to the surveys to tell us, well, here's what's going on in this Ebola-affected part of Liberia, Guinea, or Sierra Leone, where we couldn't send aid workers because it was dangerous. There were quarantines; people couldn't go. And that really increased our ability to know what was happening. Because if it had been just a few years before, we would have said, look, we just don't know, we can't go. We would be relying on rumors or maybe on just the information we get from a single person. So that's how the analytics have been turbocharged by I would say new technology. There's also the transfers that have been completely changed. So when I started working in food aid programs more than 20 years ago, we would buy food. The food would be trucked to a warehouse, and then from the warehouse to a school or to a vulnerable community, and from there it would be provided to people in need. Today, one of the big innovations has been digital payments, and people get either a credit card or on their phones, they'll get mobile money. You've got 2 billion users of, well, people around the world who use mobile money, many of them in the South, in the global South. And that means that we can get cash into people's hands in a way that's instantaneous, nearly instantaneous. And that cuts down on the logistics. It cuts down on the supply chain. It gives people more choice. So our programs are much better as a result. I give the example of a refugee community in Central Africa, and so to get food to that community, there were two solutions. One of them was to grow the food in the Midwest in the U.S., barge it down the Mississippi River to the Gulf Coast, put it on a boat in the U.S. Gulf. That boat would cross the Atlantic Ocean. It would arrive at the port of Pointe Noire in Congo. The containers were taken from that boat, put onto trucks. They would drive all the way to the Congo River, and then they would be put, they would be hoisted from the trucks to a barge. And then a pusher would push the barge up the Congo River, and then another river, the Ubangi River. So I mean, you realize this is a massive supply chain. So
Yeah.
all going well, it would take us about 5 months to get food from the U.S. to the Congo. But then sometimes the river was too low, and we had to wait for the river to rise again because it's seasonal. I mean, everywhere in the world the rivers go up and down, and so it could actually take more. But we introduced digital transfers, mobile money transfers to the refugees. And when we got a donation, so a donor tells us, here's the money for the refugees for the next 3 months, we could send it to the refugees the next day. Easy.
Right.
And the
Right.
refugees would have the money on their phones, and they'd go buy what
Yeah.
they needed on the local market. And this has tremendously changed humanitarian programs, tremendously, because it's a lot quicker and the local economy benefits a lot more. And that's really one of the keys to good humanitarian programs. It's to leverage the power of local economies, of local retailers, local businessmen, local food processors, to create jobs, to create wealth, and have a program that makes a difference, not just for those who receive them, but for society at large.
Right. In India, we have an equivalent that you would have heard called Aadhaar, which is the social security equivalent in the US. It's a biometric ID. And I was in a village in Jharkhand a few years ago where they showed how villagers would stand in line for to get their ration, which
Yes.
is meant for those who are below the poverty line or on the poverty line. And all it would take them is 90 seconds. Their mobile phone was linked to their bank accounts where the government would directly deposit the money. We call it the direct benefit transfer. And with your fingerprint, you would get certain rice and the money would automatically get debited from your account. So there was no middleman. You didn't have to worry about being bilked if you were reasonably intelligent, and you would get your produce. And all this was through paperwork not too long ago, but now it's happening with a mobile phone.
No,
Because yeah.
yeah, these technologies bring transparency. As you say, it eliminates the middleman, but they don't work on their own. I mean, they're actually quite
Hmm.
complicated to implement. In India, India is a leader in these technologies and is in fact a model for many countries around the world trying to build similar systems. Where I was in Haiti, the government wanted to build a system just like the one you have in India for its population, because this is really the way forward. It's not a humanitarian aid; it's the government setting up
Hmm.
systems that help provide benefits directly to the population. But I have to say that one thing I'm cautious about, and is the misuse of technology with very vulnerable populations. I mean, so I told you about the refugees in Congo who received mobile phone transfers. It took quite some effort to get to get the
Mm.
program to work. And in fact, and I'm a little bit ashamed to admit it, but when we started the program, a group of them came to the office and told me. Look, we shifted from giving us rice to giving us mobile money, and so I listened, and they said, could we go back to the rice? Because it didn't work at the beginning. There were a lot of small problems, many small
Right,
problems with the mobile money. I mean, the SIM cards would get blocked. Sometimes network coverage wasn't right. People just weren't familiar with the technology as well. But we stuck with it. The refugees with the local partners there, we found a way, and the mobile network operator, we found a way to troubleshoot all of this to make the technology really work for people. But then the bigger picture really is, and over there in Congo is that, why were we providing mobile money? It's because people were they didn't have access to land, and they weren't able to grow their own food. The refugees, because they were
mm,
foreigners, and it's always difficult for foreigners to acquire land in a new country. And so what we did was we approached the government with the other humanitarians, and the government approved these refugees acquiring 3 to 5 year leases on land. And when that happened, they were able to grow their own food, and it helped resolve the problem. So the technology, it solved a supply chain issue for us because it was very quick.
mm.
And in the end, the refugees were happier about the program they got. But the fundamental problem was land, and that was resolved not with technology. It was resolved by
Right.
human beings talking to each other. So yes, I'm enthusiastic about technology, but not overly so.
Yes, and you also write about artificial intelligence, how it these days is trying to solve certain problems, although it's not a magic bullet, but that also is helping, isn't it?
Okay, it can, and for us, humanitarian agencies work quite slowly, and we need a lot of warning of advanced warning of a
Mm.
crisis in order to intervene. And I've given you a few examples, but artificial intelligence now, it's essentially forecasting hunger, and it's also giving us an idea of what hunger is in places where we don't have a complete data set. So it's really augmenting our capacity to understand what's going on in our world, and it's as though we now have 360 vision. We can, or X-ray vision. We understand things
Mm.
much better than we ever did. But then the question is always, are these institutions, are these organizations always able to leverage that knowledge into actions that make a difference for the people who are most in need? That's I think is quite a challenge. There's so much information around, Abhishek. When I started my career, like I said, uh, rainfall and food prices in an Excel spreadsheet once a month, that was
Right.
easy. Um, Now there's so much information that actually organizing it and sorting through it is a
Mm.
challenge. Maybe artificial intelligence can help us with that, but we really need to be able to turn that into a plan, into a vision, and that we're ready to implement.
In all of the work that you do, this is a bit of a personal question. What part of it is you find the most fulfilling uh, across the experiences that you've had so far? What part of the job still makes you feel that I'd love to wake up this morning and go back and do this again, despite the chips being down as they are?
Well, I think I have a lot of satisfaction working with small farmers. And I'll go back to the start of the interview where I told you about my uncle Serge. And I dedicated the book to the masters of the do. The masters of the do are people, are the smallholder farmers. A Haitian author called Jacques Roumain wrote a book called the Masters of the Do. That's the term that smallholder farmers use to describe themselves in his book.
Mm.
We are the masters of the do. So it conveys their pride, their humility, and working with folks trying to eke out a living in very difficult circumstances, and actually helping them do more, grow more food, improve their it's something that has really motivated me in the past few years. I remember, so when I was in Haiti, and I left Haiti in July, but visiting these communities and seeing how simple programs can make a world of difference for these masters of the do. That's something that brought me tremendous satisfaction, because it's been so difficult for them, because they used to feed their own country and they're not able to feed their own country anymore. But working with them to have these smallholder farmers supply the national school feeding program, or have these small farmers make it to the market with the beautiful produce that they have, to see them develop new capacities, that's really something that gets me satisfied, because I know how foundational food can be for a community. I mean, food it's not just calories, it's not dollars and cents, it's identity, it's who we are. And if we're able to get food right, a lot of other things follow, because food is foundational. And working with these smallholder farmers is a great way, a great gateway into unlocking the potential of food systems to deliver better lives for everyone.
And if not 2030, is this a hard question to answer? Do you see a day in our lifetimes that we might eventually crack this with many other things for them to go right?
Look, I think the path to eliminating hunger is it's something that's known to all. But I think we haven't woken up yet. And this is the royal we. I mean, this is the global community. Unfortunately, hunger is still seen as something we can tolerate. If it's out of sight, if
Mm,
it's in a poor community that we don't see, if it's in the arid tropics, if it's in a ghetto somewhere, it seems that our society tolerates hunger, and that needs to change. And maybe this is something the new generation that's coming up needs to tackle. That a hungry person is a hungry person too many, and that it's not acceptable. I think we've just learned to accept it. And what we need to be able to do is get to the point where, you know, you, Abhishek, have the ability to help someone while you do it, and you don't just
mm,
let
right.
someone starve. So that's something that'll probably take a shift, and hopefully the generation after us, Abhishek, will get this right. But the best we can do is raise awareness about this
Right.
this this problem that's unaddressed, and that's actually quite a threat to the society we live in.
But should the storytelling change any should it be, for example, you write about some a New York Times article, was it in 2018, where there was a 7-year-old girl in Yemen who
That's right.
unfortunately starved to death, and there was a picture of her a week before she died, and that created a lot of interest, and people started donating. So do people respond to images and individual stories as compared to statistics, and should we
Well,
be doing more to dig into the guilt of people, and
well,
if that is what it takes to contribute?
so Abhishek, images are powerful. I mean, they do drive emotion, and hunger is a very emotional topic. So if
Mm,
you see pictures of a starving girl, and this was the case of this poor girl in Yemen, Amal, her name was Amal Hussein. That will create an upswell of indignation, but it's temporary.
mm,
And that's the problem. We're also very selective in what crises we choose to support, and which ones we actually forget. And there are many forgotten crises around the world. I think for a long time, when I was in while I was in Haiti, for example, we were always saying, well, there's all this attention on Ukraine and not enough on a country like Haiti. But that's because global public opinion doesn't have the bandwidth for more than one crisis at a time, perhaps. I mean, that might be one of the reasons. But we need, but hunger is the same everywhere. A severely malnourished child in one part of the world is just as vulnerable as a severely malnourished child in another part of the world. They all need help. It's not one or the other. It's everyone. And maybe the narratives need to change.
mm,
Yeah, this is really a good question. But what I've observed is that there can be a spontaneous upswell of emotion after certain disasters. The tsunami in 2004, you remember that affected the Indian Ocean. global outpouring of support, and that was great. But at the same time, you had yet an emergency in Darfur, which is very underfunded. So it's as though we pick and choose, and we have this temporary spike
Mm.
in empathy, and then it goes away. And these temporary spikes in empathy just aren't enough to reduce and deal with a problem as complex and long lasting as hunger.
So, your message is that if each of us can do a little something, when we know that there is something that can be done, we should just do it and find a medium to get our, it could be money, time, aid in whatever capacity. Then, is that how would somebody like me want to contribute? And if there are listeners, what kind of advice you might have for them?
Look, I would say there are a lot of grassroots initiatives, and I think the grassroots are one of the keys here. You shouldn't expect everything to come from the central government. There are fantastic initiatives I've seen at the very local level, from food production to food processing to markets to school programs. All these make a great difference in how hunger is tackled. You can't just have one big national program. Having I would say the grassroots also contribute to the solutions. That's vital. Again, what I know of India is it's a country with a vibrant civil society with many organized groups and certainly many groups who work on farming, on food, and supporting them is probably the best way to make a dent. And you're right. It's not just money. It's also your time. It's your effort. It's your
Mm.
advocacy. All that matters.
Thank you, Jean Martin, for all of this, for this wonderful book, The New Breadline, and for your time on the podcast. It was really, a privilege talking to you. Thanks, JM.
Thanks for the conversation, Abhishek. Appreciate it.
Thank you.